Look, these reports are certainly concerning. I understand that we employ people overseas, but in this case, we're actually employing people who are being recommended effectively by the Chinese Communist Party. Obviously, there will be procedures and processes in place to ensure that classified information, sensitive information, doesn't fall into the hands of any foreigners. But it does pose a risk. I mean, people can be just simply within earshot when discussions are taking place and collecting intelligence that may actually be useful for parties that may be wishing to take advantage of Australia in some way, shape or form.
Now, you are seeking to amend Australia's foreign influence legislation to essentially force Aussies to declare membership of any foreign political party. Why do you think that the current laws fall short?
Well, the current laws fall short in many ways in that we already have a scheme in place that doesn't seem to capture organisations such as the Confucius Institute, the United Front, organisations that are operating here in Australia. But what's been revealed over the last few days is that there are members of the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party, that are either operating in companies here in Australia or indeed overseas. Now, we must recognise that the CCP is a different organisation to most. The Australian Army, for example, has allegiance to the Australian government, whether they be a Liberal government or a Labor government. The Chinese Army, the Chinese intelligence services, have an allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. There's a very strong expectation that members of the CCP fulfil their duty for the Chinese Communist Party back at home in China, and therefore we need to have additional protections in place. We need to have a situation, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that people are not permitted to be a member of a political party from a foreign jurisdiction. The FIT scheme simply requires people to declare their membership, and then people can react accordingly. It does present a risk, and I think the government needs to look at that risk.
So would there be consequences then for members of foreign democratic political parties?
No, not at all. Again, the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme simply requires people to declare their connections back to a state, or in this case I'm suggesting they may have to declare their connections back to a foreign political party. It's simply about being open and transparent, and that's it.
You said that there is a risk and potentially of a number of breaches. Should there be an inquiry?
Look, I think questions are definitely warranted in respect of what has been uncovered over the last few days. And I myself will be putting questions on notice to the Foreign Minister about some of the issues that have been raised. We'll then see what flows from that, and if necessary, an inquiry might be appropriate.
Let's talk about China more broadly now. It is all but official that Australian coal exports to China have been formally blocked. Is it time to take it to the WTO?
Look, there's no question that there are breaches now taking place between China and Australia in respect of the WTO rules and indeed the China Free Trade Agreement. Last week in the Senate, in response to an order that I initiated, the Trade Minister Simon Birmingham tabled a document that made it very clear that it's Australia's view that China is not operating in accordance with the spirit and the letter of the China Free Trade Agreement. One of the difficulties in going to the WTO is that it's a very long and drawn-out process, and there's an additional problem in that the appeals jurisdiction of the WTO is effectively not operating because of a lack of judges for other reasons. So going to the WTO, yes, that's an appropriate formal step, but it's actually not going to achieve anything. The government needs to recognise, and I think that they're slowly coming around to this view, that this is politics at play. This is a geopolitical strategy being executed by China towards Australia. It's not about any individual trade blockage, whether it be lobster or wine or timber or beef. This is part of a strategy, and the strategy has to be dealt with in a coherent and strategic manner.
So what can Australia do, though, next, Senator? I mean, we're talking here about a $14 billion coal industry. Should Australia retaliate?
Oh, look, there are certainly things that we should do. We should do for reasons of properness. So, for example, there is clearly a breach of the CHAFTA agreement. When these agreements are signed, there are always winners and there are losers in terms of industries that win. Now, what we've seen in relation to CHAFTA, all of the sort of sanctions, unofficial sanctions that have been applied in relation to Australian industry sectors have been where we had winners with CHAFTA. And now we've got a situation where the winners are no longer winning, yet the Chinese sectors that took advantage from that particular agreement are still enjoying the benefits of the agreement. And it is time to look at cancelling that agreement, suspending at the very least and moving towards cancelling that particular agreement. That needs to be part of a broader multilateral strategy where we involve our allies and friends, where we look at things like diversification and diversification to Australia as well. So, for example, our timber industry, which is now suffering because of Chinese actions, I think there's an opportunity here for us to take our own logs and direct them at Australian sawmills with assistance from government to rebuild that particular industry which disappeared as a result of some of these exports many years ago.